Working. Baby crying. Emily, exhausted. I looked at Jessica. She was keeping track of when I was vulnerable. Yes. I swallowed. Why? We don't know. Then I noticed something, a photograph taken 5 days before Sophie was injured. It showed me sleeping upstairs that the timestamp matched the afternoon Margaret had watched Sophie. My stomach dropped. She took this while I was asleep. Yes. Then she knew I was asleep. Yes. And she knew Ryan was at work. Yes. I stared at the photograph. Suddenly, the notebook made sense. The schedules. The notes. The photographs. Margaret wasn't simply angry. She had been studying our routine. The next morning, Detective Reed told us Margaret had been formally arrested. I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt empty. What happens now? She'll go through the legal process. Will she be able to contact us? Not directly. What about relatives? If anyone attempts to contact you on her behalf, document it. I nodded. Then Jessica said, "There's something else." I looked at her. Margaret has claimed that she was trying to protect Sophie. I almost laughed. Protect her from what? From you. My stomach tightened. She says she believed you were too exhausted to care for the baby. I stared at Jessica. She hit me because she thought I was a bad mother. That is her current explanation. Shook my head. She wasn't protecting Sophie. No. Wanted control. Jessica didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ryan came to Hannah's house that evening. He stood outside the door. I didn't invite him in immediately. He waited. Finally, I opened it. He looked exhausted. How is Sophie? She slept better. He smiled slightly. That's good. I stepped aside. He entered. Hannah was in the kitchen. She gave us privacy. Ryan sat down. I've been thinking about what? My mother. I waited. I spent my whole life believing I had to keep her happy. Why? Because when she was angry, everything became difficult. Did your father know? Ryan shook his head. He left when I was young. You were alone with her, yes? That's why you defended her. Ryan nodded. I didn't know another way. I sat across from him. You know another way. Now, yes. What is it? He looked at me. Protecting my daughter. Said nothing. He continued. I've already spoken with my employer about what? I'm changing my schedule. You don't have to. I want to. I need to be present. He looked at me, and I need counseling. I nodded. That would help. I already made an appointment. That surprised me. Good. He looked down. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. He nodded. I don't deserve forgiveness right now. Felt something inside me soften. Not enough to trust him, but enough to believe. He might finally be taking responsibility. The investigation continued. The digital evidence. Specialists recovered more recordings. Some were ordinary. Others showed Margaret entering Sophie's room when she wasn't supposed. 2.1 recording showed her standing beside the bassinet late at night till she didn't touch Sophie. She simply stood there watching. Another recording showed her speaking to herself after leaving the room. The audio was faint, but one phrase was clear. She learn. Jessica believed Margaret had become increasingly resentful of my role as Sophie's mother. She had expected to be the central authority in the house. When I questioned her decisions, she viewed it as disrespect. When I protected Sophie, she viewed it as defiance. And when Ryan supported me, she viewed it as betrayal. The notebook wasn't just a diary, it was evidence of a growing obsession with control. Then came the piece of evidence that changed the case. A search of Margaret's office uncovered an old phone. Wasn't connected to her current number. Investigators examined it. There were deleted messages. Most were meaningless. But one conversation stood out. It was between Margaret and an old friend. The messages were dated. 2 weeks before Sophie was injured, Margaret had written, "Emily thinks this is her house now." The friend responded, "You need to set boundaries." Margaret replied, "I will." Then another message, "She'll understand soon." Jessica showed me the conversation. I stared at the screen. She was planning to confront me? Yes. Did? She'll say anything about Sophie? Not directly. Then Jessica scrolled. A later message appeared. "Once the baby is dependent on me, Emily will have no choice." I felt sick. What does that mean? We're trying to determine that. I looked at Ryan. He had been reading over my shoulder. His face had gone pale. She wanted Emily to depend on her. I whispered, "She wanted me trapped." Ryan nodded. "I think so." A week after the incident, Sophie was finally cleared to leave the hospital. The moment the doctor told me, I cried. I packed her tiny belongings into a bag, her blanket, her bottles, her clothes. Everything suddenly felt incredibly precious. Hannah arrived with the car. Ryan followed behind her. Before we left, Dr. Morgan gave us detailed instructions, regular checkups, neurological monitoring, developmental assessments, and immediate medical attention if we noticed certain warning signs. I wrote everything down. Ryan did to. We were no longer in guessing we were paying attention. When we reached Hannah's house, she had prepared the guest room. A small bassinet stood beside the bed. Clean clothes were folded on a chair. Diapers were stacked neatly. There were no photographs. No rules. No demands. Just a quiet room. I placed Sophie in the bassinet. She opened her eyes. I smiled. "We're home." Ryan stood behind me. He didn't touch her. He waited. I looked at him. "You can hold her?" He washed his hands. Then he carefully lifted our daughter for a few seconds. He simply looked at her. "I nearly lost you," he whispered. Sophie moved slightly. Ryan's eyes filled with tears. "I should have listened to your mother." I looked at him. My instincts. He nodded. "You knew something was wrong." I didn't correct him, because for the first time, he finally understood that night. I woke to Sophie crying. My heart immediately started racing. I jumped out of bed for a moment. I was back in Margaret's house, the nursery, the argument, the slap, the fall. Then I remembered where I was. Hannah's house. A safe house. I went to Sophie. She was crying because she was hungry. I lifted her. "You're okay." Her tiny fingers curled around mine. I began crying. Not because I was afraid, because I finally felt safe enough to cry. 2 weeks later, Margaret's attorney contacted Ryan. She wanted him to visit. Ryan refused. Then the attorney delivered a message. Margaret claimed she had been misunderstood. She said she loved Sophie. She said she wanted her family back. She said I had turned Ryan against her. Ryan listened. Then he gave the attorney one answer. "Tell my mother she is not to contact my wife or daughter." Attorney asked if he wanted to add anything. Ryan paused. Yes. He looked directly at the man. "Tell her that being my mother does not give her the right to control my family." When Ryan came home, he told me what happened. I stared at him. "That was difficult, wasn't it?" He nodded. "But it needed to be said." I smiled faintly. For the first time, I saw the difference between the man who had entered Margaret's house with me 3 months earlier and the man sitting beside me now. He was still healing. So was I, but we were finally facing the truth instead of avoiding it. Then Detective Reed called. Again. I expected another update about Margaret. Instead, she said, "Emily, we found something in the old phone that I think you need to know about." My stomach tightened. What? There was another conversation with who? We haven't identified the person yet. What did they discuss? Jessica was quiet. Then she said your move into Margaret's house wasn't as accidental as you thought. I stopped breathing. What do you mean? Some of the messages suggest Margaret knew about your financial situation before you did. I stared at the wall. She offered us the house, yes, because she wanted to help. Jessica didn't answer, then she said something. That made my blood run cold. She may have wanted you, living there for a reason. I looked toward Sophie's room. The baby monitor showed my daughter. Sleeping peacefully, my hands began to shake. If Margaret had planned our move into that house, if she had been watching our schedules, if she had been waiting for me to become dependent on her, then the night Sophie was injured wasn't the beginning of the story, it was the moment. Margaret's plan finally became visible, and somewhere, inside that old phone was the missing piece. The person she had been talking to, the person who knew about US. And possibly the person who had helped her from the beginning. The person on the other end of Margaret's messages was not a stranger, it was someone I had met more than once. Someone who had smiled at me, someone who had stood in my home and called me family. And when Detective Jessica Reed finally told me the name, I couldn't speak. It was Susan Hayes, Margaret's younger sister. I remembered her immediately. She had visited the house several times during my pregnancy. She had brought gifts for Sophie. She had complimented the nursery. She had even told me once, "You're lucky to have Margaret. She worries about everyone." At the time, I had smiled. Now those words sounded completely different. Jessica placed the recovered messages in front of me. We're still verifying everything, she explained. But the messages indicate that Margaret had been discussing your situation with Susan for several months. I stared at the screen. What did they say? She talked about your finances. My stomach tightened. She knew. Yes, she knew we couldn't afford another apartment. Yes, I looked at Ryan. He looked just as shocked. But how? Jessica explained that Margaret had apparently learned about our financial difficulties through conversations with Ryan. Then she had begun encouraging us to move into her house. I whispered. She didn't offer us a place because she wanted to help. Jessica shook her head. We can't say exactly what her original intention was, but the messages suggest she wanted more control over your living situation. I felt a strange emptiness. All those months, all those conversations, all those times, I had thanked her, and she had been keeping score. The messages continued. Margaret had written about me being exhausted. About Ryan working long hours. About how dependent I would become after Sophie was born. One message stood out. Once they're settled here, she'll have nowhere else to go. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I looked at Ryan. She wanted me trapped. Ryan nodded slowly. I think she did. I closed my eyes. The house, then rules. The criticism. The constant monitoring. Suddenly made sense. Margaret hadn't simply wanted to help us. She wanted us under her roof. She wanted control over our decisions. She wanted me to doubt myself. And when Sophie was born, that control expanded to my daughter. But Jessica wasn't finished. There is another part. I opened my eyes. What? The messages between Margaret and Susan aren't the only ones. She placed another document on the table. There was communication with someone else. Who? We're still identifying the person. Ryan leaned forward. What did they discuss? Jessica looked at him. Money. My heart tightened. What kind of money? Payments. Silence filled the room. Payments to whom? We don't know yet. Can you find out? We're working on it. And Jessica added. Something that changed everything. Some of the payments were made shortly before Margaret started insisting on watching Sophie alone. I stared at her. Are you saying someone paid her? Not necessarily. We're not making that connection yet. But the timing. Yes, Ryan stood. I need to know who it was. Jessica looked at him. You may not like the answer. The next day, investigators identified the account. It belonged to Susan. Ryan sat beside me when Jessica told us. His face went pale. Why would she pay Mom? We don't know. Then ask her. She is being interviewed. Suzanne initially denied everything. Then investigators showed her the bank records. She changed her story. She admitted sending money, but she claimed it was for household expenses. That explanation didn't fit the messages because several payments were followed by conversations about me, about my schedule, about Sophie, about Ryan's work. Eventually, Susan admitted something. She had encouraged Margaret to make me dependent on her. Not because she wanted Sophie harmed, not because she wanted anyone injured, but because she believed Margaret needed to teach me my place. Those words made me sick. A grown woman had watched another woman become increasingly controlling and had encouraged it. And somehow, both of them had convinced themselves it was justified. Margaret's lawyer later argued that she had never intended to seriously hurt Sophie, that she had been frustrated, that she had made terrible decisions, that she believed Emily was incapable of caring for the baby. But none of that erased what had happened. Intent didn't change the hospital bed. Intent didn't erase the recordings. Intent didn't erase the earlier injuries, and intent certainly didn't erase the fear my daughter had experienced. The investigators built the case piece by piece. The medical evidence, the recordings, the photographs, the notebook, the old phone, the messages, the financial records, my photographs, Ryan's childhood records, everything connected. And the more they uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Margaret had spent months creating a situation where I would depend on her. She had slowly isolated me. She had undermined my confidence. She had monitored my movements. She had documented my exhaustion. Then, when I finally challenged her authority, she crossed a line she could never uncross. Months passed. Sophie recovered far better than anyone initially expected. She needed regular appointments. There were follow-ups. There were moments when I panicked over every little sound. But slowly, she became the cheerful little girl I had always hoped she would be. She smiled more. She reacted to our voices. She loved being carried around the house. And she developed a strange habit of grabbing my necklace. Whenever I held her, every time she did it, I smiled. Life began to feel normal again. Not the old normal, a new one, a safer one. Ryan moved into a small apartment nearby. He didn't pressure me to move in with him. He didn't ask me to forget. He didn't demand forgiveness. Instead, he went to counseling to learn how to establish boundaries. He learned that loving a parent didn't mean obeying them. He learned that silence wasn't the same thing as peace. And most importantly, he learned that being a husband and father sometimes meant saying no to the person who raised him. Months later, I finally asked him to join us for dinner. He arrived carrying a small bag. Inside was a children's book. For Sophie, he said. I smiled. She has about 20 already. I know. You keep buying them. I like books. I laughed. It was the first time we'd laughed together in months. Ryan looked at me. Thank you. For what? For giving me a chance to become better. I shook my head. You're doing that yourself. He nodded. I know. And for once, there was no pressure behind his words. Eventually, Margaret's case reached court. I was asked to testify. I was terrified the night before. I couldn't sleep. I kept remembering the nursery. The argument, the fall, the ambulance, the hospital. But Hannah sat beside me. You don't have to be fearless, she said. I don't feel brave. You don't need to. What if I forget something? Tell the truth. What if my voice shakes? Let it shake. What if I cry? Then cry. I looked at her. What if I can't finish? She held my hand. Then I'll be there when you walk out. The next morning, I testified. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't insult Margaret. I didn't try to make myself look perfect. I simply told the truth. I told the court what happened that night, what I had seen, what I had noticed before, what I had ignored. And what I had learned afterward. When I finished, I felt strangely empty, not relieved, not victorious, just tired. But when I walked outside, Ryan was waiting. He didn't say anything. He simply hugged me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe the worst part was, finally behind us, the court eventually reached its decision. Margaret was held accountable for what she had done. Susan also faced consequences for her involvement. I won't pretend that seeing them face the legal system magically repaired everything. It didn't. There were still nightmares. There were still difficult days. There were still moments when I questioned my own judgment, but accountability mattered because what happened to us wasn't something that should be hidden behind the word family. Family is supposed to protect you, not control you, not frighten you, not make you question your worth, and definitely not make you afraid to trust your own instincts. A year after Sophie came home from the hospital, I returned to the old house, not because I wanted to live there. I had no intention of ever doing that again. I went because some of our belongings were still there. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The hallway seemed narrower. The nursery door was still there. I stood outside it for a long time. Then I opened it. The room was empty. No crib. No blankets. No photographs. Just four walls. I expected to feel afraid. Instead, I felt something else. Closure. I walked to the window. This was where everything had changed, but it wasn't where my story ended. I took one final look around. Then I walked out. I locked the door behind me and I never looked back. Today, Sophie is a happy little girl. She loves picture books. She loves music. She laughs whenever Ryan makes ridiculous faces. And every morning, when she wakes up, she runs into my room and climbs onto my bed. Sometimes she still reaches for my necklace. Sometimes she simply hugs me. And every time she does, I remember that night, not because I want to, but because it reminds me how close I came to losing everything. I've also learned something else. Trust your instincts. Not every uncomfortable feeling means danger. But when something repeatedly feels wrong, don't automatically silence yourself just because someone tells you that you're overreacting. Ask questions. Comment things. Seek help. And most importantly, don't let anyone convince you that protecting yourself or your child makes you difficult. I spent months believing that keeping peace meant staying quiet. I was wrong sometimes. Keeping peace means walking away from the person creating the chaos. Sometimes loving your family means setting boundaries. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit, I don't feel safe here anymore. That sentence changed my life. One evening, years later, Sophie was sitting beside me on the couch. She was looking through an old photo album. Mommy? Yes, sweetheart. Were you scared when I was a baby? I froze for a moment, then I smiled. Yes. Why? I looked at her. Because I loved you very much. She thought about that then. She leaned against me. I'm glad you were my mommy. My eyes filled with tears. I kissed the top of her head. And I'm glad I was yours. Went back to her book. I looked out the window. The sun was setting. For years, I had believed that night had taken something from me. And it took my innocence. It took my trust in people I thought were family. It took the version of myself who believed keeping everyone happy was more important than listening to her own heart. But it also gave me something. Courage. The courage to speak. The courage to leave. The courage to protect my daughter. And the courage to build a life where love didn't come with fear. I don't know what would have happened if that baby monitor hadn't recorded those moments. Maybe the truth would eventually have come out. Maybe it wouldn't have. But I know this. Sometimes the smallest piece of evidence can become the loudest voice in the room. And sometimes, when everyone tells you that you're imagining things, you have to trust yourself enough to keep looking for the truth. Because your voice matters, your instincts matter, and your family's safety matters. If you've stayed with Emily and Sophie's story all the way to the end, thank you. If this story touched you, you can leave a comment and tell me what you think Emily should have done differently, or whether you believe she made the right decision by trusting her instincts. And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, courage, trust, and second chances, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Sometimes, one decision can change an entire life. And sometimes, finding the courage to speak up is the beginning of a completely new one.